Um, okay, you know that I'm not real good on the economy. I think it's mostly imagination and emotion. But so tell me what MaTaG is thinking here. She introduced a bill, it got shot the hell down. Not even the Republicans wanted it. I think it would prevent us from selling oil to China. And I know that's a thing that you've spoken on about before. Uh,
So,
Limits the drawdown of petroleum in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve until the Department of Energy develops a plan to increase the percentage of federal lands leased for oil and gas production. Um, I think the China thing is later, but this is the basic idea of it, of her suggestion.
well, I think that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and I think I've actually argued that it's for national defense purposes, but
Mm-hmm.
actually, most of it isn't, actually. It is for economic purposes. So
Okay.
I will say that it has been used properly by the Biden administration.
Okay.
So I'll give them the dub
I
for that,
was I was going
actually.
to ask you that because I don't know enough
Um,
about it. I have
we
heard people
have
say
our
it's for defense as well, but
we
all right.
have a separate reserve for defense, and of course the SPR can be tapped for defense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's not our primary reserve for defense. It has historically been used in an economic context.
Mm-hmm.
When oil prices got ridiculous, the SPR was tapped into. And so, yeah, the thing is that what she's saying is that basically, if we don't produce more oil and gas,
Mm-hmm.
then using our SPR is a band aid measure that is not going to fix. And this is a very, I don't like uh, Marjorie Taylor Greene um,
I know. Yeah, I know.
for reasons we've discussed.
Yeah.
Uh, but to give the most charitable interpretation here would be that if we don't increase our production,
Mm-hmm.
then what we're looking at is we stop tapping the SPR, um, and we're already at levels lower than they've been in over half a century.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, as soon as we stop doing that, that takes between 1 and 2 million barrels per day of oil off the market.
Mm-hmm.
And what that does is it brings back exactly the problem that we started tapping the SPR for in the first place, which is a supply demand imbalance, which results in really high oil prices.
Okay.
So, what she is saying on this bill, I read some of it while it was on the screen here, or some of this article,
Mm-hmm.
is that we would is that she wants us to be able to produce more oil
Mm-hmm.
in order to keep the costs lower for longer, as opposed to continuing to draw down on the SPR until we just can't anymore.
Okay.
And that, that doesn't actually fix the underlying issue.
Okay.
Producing more will.
It will bring prices down. Yeah, and we will run out sooner, which I'm half on board for. The sooner we run out, the better. Uh,
Hey, I got plenty of investments in oil and gas stocks, so if we run out of the SPR and prices go to $200 a barrel, then I'll be sitting pretty.
no, I mean like literally globally. We need to run out. We need to get off of this thing we're dependent on
Oh,
and
well, we'll never run
come
out
up
of
with
it.
better. Mm,
Um, we
mm,
we were supposed to hit peak oil like 30 years ago, and we never did.
Peak
And the
oil is
reason is
just
because,
economic nonsense. There is an amount of this stuff, and it will run out someday.
well, someday, yes, and we are working on transitioning away from it.
Are we?
But yeah,
She,
I mean,
old MaTaG screams bloody murder about the Green New Deal every 5 minutes.
that's fine. I don't really even remember what was in the Green New Deal.
I know,
So,
but anytime,
whatever.
hey, let's get away from oil. You're part of the Modular. You are now part of the Green New Deal. I'm sorry. You just said, hey, we're trying to transition. So you
We are.
are you're part of the Green New Deal now. I'm sorry. You're part of it. You are,
I am in favor
and
of
MaTaG is going
the
to
care.
cancel you. I mean, she's going to cancel
See,
you.
no, I think that if you asked MaTaG if she was okay with expanding our development and research, or R&D into, or our grants for that stuff into like solar technology and whatnot, she probably would go for it.
I think she'd call it Green New Deal. And
I mean,
thought terminating cliche. She's going to terminate that thought. Green
I
New
would
Deal. Get
certainly
out
be
of
in
here.
favor of expanding our R&D for green technologies,
I
and
agree.
especially for I think my preference, like as technology stands at the moment, my preference would be to invest substantially in nuclear power.
Hmm. I agree. It's
I
the
think
left
that
that doesn't like that so much. It's the Democrats that don't like that so much. I know. Both sides are kicking us in the ass. All
I
right.
think that nuclear power is something that we've allowed um, scare tactics to keep us away from.
Hmm.
Uh, but we probably, given several $billion of funding and in about 10 years, we could probably transition most of the U.S. power grid uh, to being powered by nuclear, as opposed to fossil fuels, as
Hmm.
it currently is.
Hmm.
Um, I also agree with reforestation,
Okay.
and
I know
assuming that
that.
we can get the nuclear plants going, then I would be also in favor of finding some way to stimulate the transition to electric vehicles.
Hmm.
But none of these things are punitive against oil, and then none of those things prevent our production of oil while we still need it. So that's where I'm at. I've been
Okay.
in this position for many years now,
Yeah.
where I'm in favor of moving us in a certain direction
Hmm.
with positive incentive
Hmm.
and research.
Hmm.
I'm not in favor of tanking our economy, of restricting our own production of currently vital resources, um, which really only makes us dependent on external supply
Hmm.
in order to make that transition. I don't believe in that. I think that we should be continuing to produce. We should be continuing to. Um, we shouldn't be punishing the companies that are producing these resources, that are extracting them from the ground,
Hmm.
because we want to make a green transition. We should be making the green transition while also not making life difficult for Americans.
It sounds like a good idea, and I'm have nothing to argue against you at the moment. I don't think there's anything wrong with what you said. I think it's a fine idea, and I think it's the right way to go. But I don't think the oil company would allow it. I think they will hire lobbyists who then support MaTaG. Then they're going to hire lobbyists that go
Well,
against the plans that you just laid, because they would make less profit in the long run. If you hurt an oil company's profits by suggesting solar, I mean, didn't Ronald Reagan put or Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House, and then Ronald Reagan took them off because a uh, oil company paid him to or pressured him to?
I mean, sure, the lobbying is never going to stop from any direction, um, but oil companies make less money when oil prices are lower, and oil companies are not a monolith. They compete with one another.
Hmm.
So what she is saying is that she wants to cap the SPR drawdowns until such time as what was it? They allow expanded drilling on federal lands.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Which that expanded drilling would increase production and would allow for lower prices, which
Mm-hmm.
actually reduces the power of your major oil companies. Because it's not the major companies, or not all just the major companies that will expand into those lands. It's also small and mid-sized companies that will do that.
Mm-hmm.
They will compete with each other. So I would say that lower oil prices are generally a benefit to our economy.
Mm-hmm.
When our economy is doing well, we get more revenues in terms of taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we have the opportunity to move towards more green energy than we do when we are following our current path, which is to restrict as much oil production as possible, to impose punitive like damages basically against companies for producing. Um, yeah, I'm a big fan of the carrot and not so much of the stick.
Okay. What about climate change? If those prices go down and the use goes up, that increases the carbon in the air. That increases the likelihood of disastrous climate change. If there's a stick, that's why. I know you don't like that stick, but that stick might be stopping the oil companies from pushing us over the cliff. You're calling it a stick, but I'm calling it a guardrail at the edge of a cliff. It's
I
made out of
don't
wood and it's a stick, and if they're running into it is from my position anyway.
I think that the first question to be asked is, even if we halted our oil production entirely,
Mm-hmm.
how much does that actually impact climate change? And how much does that harm the ability for us to develop new technologies in the meantime? Because the stick harms our economy.
Mm-hmm.
We need our economy in order to continue to develop things. And
Yeah,
also, the primary driver of increasing um, carbon in the atmosphere, of the increasing greenhouse gas, is not the United States.
I know. We did all our
So,
industrializing in the 1900s, back in the
yeah,
1910s and the 1920s. That's when we
most
built
of
all
the
our stuff up.
growth in carbon emissions is from developing countries.
Right. Because when we did it, nobody was counting those things. So I mean,
But if those countries develop,
mm-hmm.
which they're going to need oil to do,
Mm-hmm.
then presumably their own consumption will also fall
Mm-hmm.
as they also start to make green transitions, right?
Hopefully, yeah. That's best case scenario is that, I mean, yeah, best case scenario is that we don't tank the entire market, because I'm not suggesting we stop all oil today. I'm just suggesting that intelligent people need to be elected to make decent and intelligent plans. We're not getting that anymore. We don't have well measured, intelligent people leading the country anymore. We have
Well,
extremists. I know there are extremists on the left as well, but and extremists on the left would say stop all the oil right now and let the economy be damned, and I wouldn't follow that extreme either. Um, it's like we need nuance and uh, not middle of the road, but uh, compromise. We need nuance and compromise, and that ain't the name of the game anymore.
I'll say this. The price of energy, which we primarily still get from fossil fuels,
Mm-hmm.
is a primary driver of inflation.
Okay.
Now, our consumer price index has been dropping on the year-over-year basis lately. So earlier in the year, it actually came close to 8% increase year over year. I think the last print had us down below a 7% increase, but
Mm-hmm.
don't quote me on those numbers. I'm
Okay.
just going off memory.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean that prices are coming down. They're still going up, but it's the rate of change that has been coming down.
Okay.
Um, so, and what I mean by that is, like, say in August, if our consumer price index was 7.5%, it means that all the stuff that's accounted for in the CPI,
Mm-hmm.
uh, the previous August is now 7.5% more expensive, right?
Okay.
Whereas in December, if it was 6.5%, then that means that the previous December we're only 6.5% more expensive in December than we were the previous December, as opposed to the 7.5% more expensive in August than the previous August.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that the previous August was also, let's say, 2 or 3% more expensive than the previous August before that, right?
Okay.
So we have a continued inflation that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the rate at which that needs to be controlled. Now,
Because
energy prices are accounted for in the CPI, but I don't believe that they're part of core CPI. However, the things that are a part of core CPI are all influenced by energy because in order to deliver goods, you have to be able to transport them, right?
mm-hmm.
In order to grow wheat, you generally need fertilizer. What's a primary ingredient of fertilizer? Natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all these energy prices are baked into our consumer price index.
Mm-hmm.
In order to control inflation, we have our Federal Reserve, and our Federal Reserve has to increase the federal funds rate. So if the federal funds rate continues to get increased, that's what's been stagnating our economy lately because you increase the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is essentially the risk-free rate for taking out or for giving a loan, right? So if the rate is 4%, then that's 4%. If you invest in that, it's essentially like buying a bond. Um,
This
then
is
the
where
risk-free rate is 4%.
mhm. This is where I start to
Right?
say it's all imaginary and emotional.
Well, every bank that's going to give a loan is never going to give a loan at less than 4% interest at that point because if the risk-free rate, the chance that there's a default on the loan is 4%, right? There's a 0% chance, or if there is any chance that the government defaults on a loan, then we're all fucked anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if the risk-free rate is 4%, then there's no bank that will give less than 4% on a loan, on a AAA loan, right? And then you get into the lower rated ones, and you're talking about 6%, 7%, 8% type interest rates
Mm-hmm.
on more risky loans as you get into the B's and the C's, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is where the slowdown in the economy comes from. Is if money gets more expensive to borrow, then there is going to be less money flowing through the economy.
Okay. Um,
So, in order to combat inflation, the Fed increases the federal funds rate.
by
And
their best guesses. Now we're in uh, trusting economists, and I don't trust economists. But I suspect that they're going to just do what's best for themselves.
well,
And if we're lucky, what's best for them is what's best for everybody.
you would hope.
I
Well,
I don't know if it
it isn't
is.
always.
It isn't always. What's best for the environment isn't what's best for the oil company. So they are acting in their own self-interest. They're an oil company. This is what they do.
Yes, everyone acts in their own self-interest.
Great. Well, then we've got those people in charge of a complicated economic system that seems to me to be based on feelings, guesses, and um, their own imagination. And that's why I don't trust economics. I mean, I know there's a lot of numbers and math and science involved in it,
Economics has
but
always sort of been a matter of feelings
I know,
and placing value in certain things that
I know.
might not necessarily have that value. I mean, even back when we weren't in a fiat system like we are now,
Hmm.
uh, the dollar was backed by an ounce of gold,
Hmm.
right? $1 was 1 ounce of gold.
Hmm.
Well, what's the real value of an ounce of gold? I mean, it doesn't actually do
Oh,
anything. It's not as
I
good of a conductor as copper.
I agree completely.
I mean,
You
it's a
can't you can't eat
it's
it.
yeah, you
You
can't eat it.
you
It's
can't
not a
turn it into
bullet.
a weapon.
You know,
You can't turn
it's
it into a plow. You cannot uh, do very much of anything with it, with the
exactly. Does
gold.
gold have its uses? Yes. Does it? I mean, is it primarily used for those uses?
Hmm.
No. Uh, the fact that it's a precious metal, the rarity of it,
Hmm.
is what gives it its value.
It's
Um,
shiny.
but
Yeah.
but the fact is that before the dollar, we used like actual gold in trade.
Right, because it was
You know,
hard to get. It was hard to come by, and it was easily worked.
yeah.
So you could work it into coins and stuff like that. And it
So
was
so
hard to find.
currency has always been a matter of placing value in things.
I know.
Um, and then everything else built on that is yeah, it's largely theoretical,
I know, and the
right?
entire
But
civilization is built on it.
understanding, yeah, it is. So understanding it, understanding
Is
how it functions,
understanding
is
what's
kind of important.
yes, it is, but it gets there. It gets to a point where the people of the Fed, I don't trust them, because they're wrong a lot. Aren't they wrong often? Pretty often, they do things. Things go wrong. Things they didn't see coming happen. I recognize that sometimes you don't see the storm coming, and then it hits you and it hurts. But
Well, yeah, for example, the during COVID, when COVID hit, the Fed turned the money printer on,
right, nobody saw that
right?
coming. They did what they thought
Nobody,
was best, but it was wrong.
right?
Yeah. Would you say that it
Um,
was the wrong thing to do?
well, we really had two options at the time. It was allow the economy to tank and put millions into poverty,
Hmm.
or turn the money printer on and hope for the best.
Hmm.
And so they turned the money printer on. I'd say that the consequence of turning the money printer on is we now have the runaway inflation that we're looking at.
Hmm.
But the inflation is starting to come down. I think actually the Fed has done a reasonably good job this time around in uh, attempting their so-called soft landing
Hmm.
for our economy.
Hmm. Okay.
They've been helped in the last few months by oil prices coming down. They were at $120 a barrel this summer.
Hmm.
They're down to 80 now. So that's been a benefit.
Okay. Well,
Um,
I agree with you.
the
They shouldn't have turned the money printer on. They should have taxed the rich and given it to the poor. But that's my position anyway. It's always my position.
well,
Uh, but they turned the money printer on instead, and then gave that to everybody. Um, all right. Um, as usual, I don't quite get it. But we were talking about MaTaG. What else we got? Anything
anyway,
else?
well, what I was talking
Yeah, okay,
about
okay, yeah, sorry. Good.
was that because oil is such a driver of the consumer price index, the Fed has to, and the Fed wants to bring inflation down. Increasing that federal funds rate is going to reduce the amount of money flowing through the economy, which naturally is going to cause potentially a recession,
Hmm.
right? So, in order to prevent that from happening, we would want our oil prices down so that the Fed can reasonably pivot off of their increases in rates,
Mm-hmm.
which they've increased just about every month, the federal funds rate. I think there were several months in a row where they increased it by 75 basis points, with it, which is 0.75%.
Mm-hmm.
And the consensus for this month, because our CPI has been cooling down so much, I think the consensus is now that they're only going to raise it by, it's either 25 or 50 basis points instead of 75, right? So their rate of increasing the federal funds rate is slowing down.
Mm-hmm.
If oil goes way back up, we're going to see a really hot CPI print. And that hot CPI print will cause the Fed to increase rates faster again, which is harmful to the economy in general.
Okay.
So we want low oil prices. And in order to get that, we have to have a supply and demand balance.
Okay. I can agree with those things. I just worry how we deal with climate change, which is why I want the oil to run out, so that we'll come up with something better. Necessity
Well,
being the mother of
as
invention.
far as climate change goes, either we deal with it or
Well,
the world is fucked. So,
I mean, one of the first steps in dealing with it is cutting the use of fossil fuels, which you've given a plan for, and I agree. It's fine. Let's make careful decisions based on facts and reality. But we can't, because MaTaG's in charge.
just put me in charge. I'll fix everything. It's okay.
That's fine. I'd vote for you before I vote for MaTaG, that's for sure.
I should certainly hope so.
Yeah. You're way above her on the list. Do you want to see her talk about Antifa?
Oh, Christ. Sure.
Okay. Unmute. Tell me how the
Taylor Greene
volume works.
represents Georgia.
I don't hear it at all.
Congress. She joins us tonight. Congresswoman, this happened in your state. I'm just amazed by how little we know.
The stream does.
There's this militia that kind of floats around America, and when needed, they show up and start burning buildings and flipping over
pull
police
up the
cars,
same
and
video.
no one knows who they are or who's paying for this. How can that be?
What's it called? Marjorie Taylor Greene, Antifa ground troops.
Yeah.
You laid it out
just
perfectly, and I think honestly,
where are you at on the time?
I'm about 24, but go ahead and start.
24 seconds in.
Mm-hmm.
Antifa. Look at what they've done over years now. Just from 2020, they're responsible for nearly $2 billion in damage and many people dead. But the war is against the police, and the reason why is because Antifa is the ground troops of the Democrat Party. Not only are they the ground troops, they breed them, they raise them, and then they bail them out of jail when they get arrested. But they never get prosecuted, and that's because, well, we know the truth. It's the Democrats in control, and it's the establishment, and it's the unelected bureaucrats that make no apologies for their support of Antifa. Well, it's time to do something about Antifa, and that's why I'm going to introduce legislation to declare Antifa domestic terrorist, because they need to be taken apart. We need to investigate exactly who they are, who funds them, and then we need to make sure that whenever they come out and erupt in violence, attacking police officers and attacking businesses in cities like my city, in Atlanta, in Georgia, we need to make sure that they're arrested and charged with domestic terrorism charges, just like the GBI did this past weekend. Enough of Antifa. They are not the anti-fascists. They are the fascists. And they always show up and they defend Democrat causes. Not only do they attack police, but they defend the drag queens, targeting our children with drag queen story time. They go after people when they're not vaccinated and demand they get vaccinated and wear masks during the so-called pandemic. But enough of Antifa. We've had it with them, and it's time to do something about it.
Yeah, that was kind of a tell, I would say.
Antifa. She wants to declare them domestic terrorists, and how is she going to determine if somebody is Antifa? It's not a group. It's not a. I don't have an Antifa card, you know. And even
Well,
it's an ideology. It's an idea. And if you
sure.
start saying that ideas are illegal, you're talking about thought crimes.
Well, no, these people are committing actual crimes.
If you spray paint that building, then you get charged for spray painting that building.
Sure, and if you blow up the car, you get charged for blowing up the car.
Great.
However,
the
fact is that they are doing that for political reasons.
Yes.
Which makes it by definition terrorism. Yes.
Makes it by definition a protest.
No.
Was the
No,
Boston Tea Party terrorism?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Then was it a good thing? Were we happy about
violence? Hold on. The use of violence or threat of violence, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political goals, is terrorism.
I think that's a new definition. I think that definition has come about from authoritarians who don't want you to fight against them. I think MaTaG there is calling them terrorists to, I think she would call Martin Luther King a terrorist. I think she would call the marches that happened in the South for civil rights terrorism, because she doesn't want it, she doesn't like it, because she is an authoritarian. She's the authority. You will do what she says, and if you protest, it's terrorism and a crime. I watched those videos. Yes, they're doing things that are crimes, but so was the Boston Tea Party. Our entire country was built on crimes against the government that they thought was unjust, and that's what those people are doing. Though Antifa and those people in those clips are fighting against the government that they don't respect anymore. And this is a sentiment that the right wing throws around all the time. The tree of liberty will be watered with the blood of tyrants, you know. Well, MaTaG, you're a tyrant.
And to be clear, the terrorism aspect of the Boston Tea Party is different in some ways. For example, no one died or was even injured.
Okay. We had the gigantic summer of George Floyd protests, and very few people died. Some people died, but it was the largest protest movement the country had ever seen, and very few people died. I mean, I'd say per capita it was pretty good. Is what she's saying a good idea? If the person was at that protest right there and they spray painted the building, are they charged for spray painting the building, or are they charged for being Antifa?
Probably for spray painting the building, because
okay.
Spray painting the building is obviously a criminal act, but it's not a violent one, which
mm-hmm.
doesn't make it terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be violent.
Okay. And violence only works. It's only violent if there's a person involved. If it's against a person. Breaking a cop car and setting it on fire is or isn't violence?
That's an excellent question. I would say that probably is violence. I wouldn't say spray painting is, though.
Okay.
I would say, in the same way that there's a certain amount of violence or threat of violence involved with the Boston Tea Party folks going in, and they did threaten the guards of the ships
mm-hmm.
In order to get to the tea, and then they did destroy the property by throwing it into the water.
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is a threat of violence, and B, destruction of property, which is theoretically a violent act.
Mm-hmm.
You could call that terrorism, yes,
Okay.
by definition.
Okay.
So, and they did do it to pursue a political end, which was to not be taxed, right? To change the tax code from the British.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's why I hate that word, terrorism. It's the slippery slope that's been going on, right? That more and more things become terrorist. Anything that the government doesn't like just becomes terrorism.
I think that burning buildings and cop cars and whatnot, those are violent acts, and they are acts of terrorism. I think the individual that commits that crime should be charged with it. The problem is that in most of these cases, there are so many people out there
Mm-hmm.
that you're never going to catch the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an interesting, weird situation there. Like, do most people that are members, I say members, but yes, they are not a, they're a nebulous
Highly decentralized
group.
movement. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a nebulous movement. Can you just say that anybody calls themselves Antifa? Because they're not really an organization.
Right.
That's correct. So it's hard to actually designate them. I would say that anybody that goes to these protests is at those protests for a political goal,
Sure.
but the ones that commit the violent acts, I mean, there's no real membership unless you actually have an organization that has like membership rules and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I don't understand how you can call something that's not an organization a terrorist organization, which is where I find fault in Marjorie Taylor Greene's assessment there.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
If they're not organized.
If it's not an organization, you can't call it a terrorist organization. Yeah, like, I mean, they don't have a leader, they don't have any of that. It's nebulous. So you can't designate it a terrorist organization.
Mm-hmm.
But if somebody who committed a crime, a violent crime, during one of those protests is caught, they should be charged with terrorism.
Okay. With terrorism. I don't like that word. Again, I think they're protesting. I think you charge them.
Good does an act of protest do to to destroy cars in a dealership's parking lot because you're mad that a black guy died at the hands of police?
It harms the economy. That's the point, man.
It
That's
harms
the
somebody's
point.
livelihood.
What good does throwing a bunch of tea into the river do? It makes people pay attention. It proves that you are willing to, you are not okay with the way that you're being governed. What good does a peaceful protest that nobody notices do? What good does a peaceful protest inside the protest zone do you? The government sets up a nice little protest zone. They put on the fences, and they put in the porta potties, and they put in the little thing, and you can go into the free speech protest zone. Nothing happens. Doesn't do any good. Doesn't accomplish anything. If Martin Luther King Jr. was marching within the protest zone, nothing would have changed. Doesn't do any good. You actually have to disrupt things. You actually have to cause mayhem. You have to cause damage. You have to cause people to pay attention, and you have to make people think that there is a problem. You have to suggest to people that there is a problem that you are not, that the protesters aren't going to accept any longer.
See where you're coming from.
I don't write. I'm just taking what. I mean, I'm not saying that you've said this as a conservative, but conservatives tell me that they have guns so that they can fight the oppressive government. Well, that guy used spray paint to fight the oppressive government, and MaTaG hates it.
Those guys that say they have guns to fight the oppressive government intend, if it ever comes down to it, to actually shoot at agents of the government.
Right.
The guy with spray paint spray painted a corner store.
Yes. He is
That
far
is not
less.
the same thing.
I agree. He is with the spray paint is far less dangerous.
And I am saying that he should be charged with being spray painting. And I already said that that's not a violent act.
Okay. But the guys with the hard right guys who are collecting guns to fight the government don't agree with the guy with the spray paint. Shouldn't they be on the same
And
side?
also,
Shouldn't they agree with each other?
well, hold on. And also, the guys with those guns haven't actually done anything.
Not yet. Not at the moment.
Whereas the actual act of committing a crime is what is necessary for you to be arrested for it.
I mean, they took over a bird sanctuary once.
Weren't they arrested for that?
After a long,
They had like a long
drawn-out
standoff.
stand
I forget
down.
what it was
Right.
called, the Bundy Ranch, right?
Yeah, the Bundy guys. Yeah, they were
Yeah.
protesting the
And-
government with weapons, and they were protesting the government action. Now, let's imagine a person who completely agreed with Aben Bundy and his takeover of that bird sanctuary, and they thought that he was doing the right thing and fighting the government. Does that person that I just invented, agree with Antifa? Do they support that kid using spray paint on the building? No, they don't. They think he's Antifa, and they think he's a terrorist. Yet they're not terrorists. Ammon Bundy, not a terrorist. Kid on the street with spray paint is a terrorist. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because MaTaG is a conservative. Those are conservative people. And they're against, they're pro-authoritarianism. They're anti-Antifa, which makes them pro-fascism. Yes.
Sort of lost the thread of what you were trying to say.
Maybe rambly. MaTaG is an authoritarian, whether she knows it or not.
Okay.
She's
Based
the
on the
fascist.
fact that she wants to
make thought
label
crimes.
Antifa a
Thought
terrorist
crimes.
group.
Thought crimes. If you do that spray paint thing in an Antifa way, if you Antifa-ly spray paint, you get more punishment. You become a domestic terrorist. You are tried and prosecuted for holding thoughts and opinions. And I think it's highly...
I disagree with the characterization, I think.
You don't think
I
I'm
think that
characterizing it? Okay.
I think that she fundamentally misunderstands what exactly Antifa is supposed to be.
I agree.
Which, I mean, if you think of it as an organization, then you could call it a terrorist organization because it has engaged in violent acts to achieve political goals.
Mm-hmm.
However, the fact that it's not an organization means that you obviously can't label a terrorist organization against something that's not an organization. So
I think there's an entire...
her problem is that she has a fundamental misunderstanding of what Antifa is.
I think she fundamentally misunderstands the entire planet. I think there's an entire planet called Earth that she fundamentally doesn't understand.
That's fine. That's, I mean...
Why do I bring her up? I think she's going to be the vice president.
God.
I think either Trump or whoever wins the primary, chooses her as their VP pick. And whether it's DeSantis or Trump, I think they choose her as vice president. And then what we have is a authoritarian-leaning person who fundamentally doesn't understand most of the planet. And that slides us closer to fascism.
If she gets picked as a vice president, it would be an insurance pick, I think.
Well, sure. Would it be a smart move for either one of those guys to pick her?
And only in the sense that nobody at that point would want the president removed by any means, because it means that she would be in charge. That's what I mean by an insurance pick. It's the same way that Trump, I think, picked Pence as an insurance pick, because as much as the left hated Trump, they would hate Pence more.
Oh, I don't think they would. I would have preferred Pence.
I think that the funny thing is that Biden might have been an insurance pick for Obama. And now he's our president.
Well, I don't think it was insurance. I think it was filling in your gaps. Hey, this Obama guy kind of light on the foreign policy during the.
So maybe that was supposed to be synergistic. I thought it was insurance because I didn't think Biden was electable as president until he became
barely
president.
got elected. Yeah.
Yeah.
He had a lot of foreign policy expertise back then, and that was one of the biggest things that Hillary hit Obama on during the primary. Is you don't even know what our stance is on Libya. Like, how can you possibly be the president if you don't know what we're doing with Chechnya? And to cover the things that he was missing, he chose Joe Biden, who the Democrats all said he had great foreign policy creds. And covering things that you're missing, I think, is what Trump did with Pence as well. Pence was a standard Republican. I mean, if you had to build a Republican in a laboratory, it would be a lot like Mike Pence.
Maybe. I think that that Pence's evangelical side is what made him so unpalatable to the left, and what made him a good insurance pick. I don't think that.
Yeah, because he's stable.
I don't think that Pence.
The reason I said that
would have been a good. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the reason I would prefer him is because he's stable. I know what he's thinking. I know what he's going to do tomorrow. Trump is chaotic, stupid. He's chaotic and wild, and we do not know what he's going to do tomorrow. Pence, we can see him coming from a mile away. But go ahead. Sorry.
A better choice for vice president for Trump, if he was looking for a certain synergy, would have not been to go for a governor. He should have gone for like an experienced senator as his vice president to fill in the gap where there is a lack of political deal-making knowledge, basically.
Okay.
I think that if the vice president under Trump was some senator, and I don't know who, but somebody that has already built the relationships that are necessary in politics to get things done. That's what Trump lacked. Is he spent his entire term fighting his own party on getting things done. Whereas if you had a vice president that had been in the system, been friends with all these guys, and worked with them and voted with them, he might have gotten more done.
Oh, I bet that's kind of Mike Pence, isn't it?
I think that Mike Pence, as a governor, was not in
spending time in
House of Congress all the time. Right, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, you're right.
That's where I think Trump failed the hardest in terms of his political gamesmanship. He didn't give himself any ins in order to get things done. He ended up fighting from the outside, like, basically the whole time.
Okay. So this is why I was harping on MaTaG. I think that the primaries happen, and either one of them would pick her. because she is a ratings magnet. She would get all of that free press that Donald Trump got.
I wonder about if they will go with that strategy again, though. And by go with that strategy again, I mean they've tried it already. Back in 2008 with Sarah Palin.
They thought, no, they didn't think she was this crazy. They didn't vet Sarah Palin. Nobody knew who she was before she walked out on that stage. She was, yes, governor of Alaska, but there's 17 people in Alaska. Sorry, Alaska. Nobody knew who she was. I'd never heard her name before. And
But
I've been
Palin was a
watching the damn
ratings
thing.
magnet.
She was a ratings magnet, and so was Trump, and that got them the win.
I think they picked Palin for two reasons. It's because, one, she's a woman,
Mm-hmm.
so you could try to get some of the female vote over
From
having
Hil-
the first woman vice president.
and
Yeah,
she was announced the day after Hillary lost the primary,
right.
and
And then
Mhm.
you have that same angle for Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Mhm.
although Kamala, you know, has already taken that thunder.
Mhm.
But also the fact that Marjorie Taylor Greene would be a ratings magnet, it'd be in very much the same way that Sarah Palin was, I think,
Mhm.
because Palin said some really dumb shit
yeah,
on the campaign, and Marjorie would too.
yeah,
So
and it, Twitter didn't exist quite the way it did in what year was that? That was 2008. I mean, uh, all the politicians in the world weren't on Twitter putting out sound bites. I think MTG would be, or MaTaG would be chosen for the ratings, and she would bring them in. She would bring the ratings in. She would bring the people. Everybody would look. Everybody would watch. I think that's what DeSantis is doing. Why did he do the stunt with the immigrants? To get in the news, to get the ratings, to make people look at him, talk about him, and pay attention to him.
I think
He's-
Marjorie Taylor Greene would be disastrous as a pick for a candidate. If they make that pick, you should be celebrating because they'll fucking lose.
I don't know.
So
I
honestly,
would,
from my
that's-
perspective, I definitely would never want to see her picked as the vice president because I would know that they're gonna fucking lose, and I don't want them to lose. So, I mean, Trump doesn't need the extra ratings, first of all, and DeSantis comes from a swing state, and he's well liked in that swing state. I think that they already have enough coverage that they don't need Marjorie Taylor Greene to get them that coverage. I think that the best bet for them, for Trump, would be to pick somebody that is a current senator, or maybe one that maybe just lost re-election or something like that, by a slim margin, hopefully, or a well, that's about it. Or maybe one of the more experienced House of Representative members.
I don't know. An experienced person is going to stop Donald Trump from doing what he does. Stop him from being him. I think if DeSantis wins the primary, he picks MaTaG as a stunt because he is running a stunt-based
And he'll
campaign.
lose. That's
and he
the problem,
might.
though.
I'm worried that he won't, honestly, because
I think the best
it'll be against Joe Biden, who
I think the best
is
option for both of them is to pick somebody that's like a current senator, somebody that's well liked in the Senate, preferably somebody that's relatively moderate that has a track record of getting things done in a bipartisan fashion, which is going to be a very unpopular choice among Republicans. But who the fuck else are they going to vote for anyway if
I
the
know.
primary is already over?
I know.
So
Okay. Well, I want.
that's my thinking.
Yeah, I'm just giving you my worst case scenario here.
Trust me, Marjorie Taylor Greene as the vice president is my worst case scenario because the Republicans will lose.
What if they won? DeSantis Green wins. What happens?
And then our president has a great insurance policy.
can't fight against the fascist because the one behind him is even worse.
I don't think I'd call either one of them fascist, but I think we have a disagreement on that.
That's fine. I will call MaTaG a fascist.
No,
And DeSantis is leaning that way, but we can talk about that anyway at the time. We already went over it and over and over and over again. I don't know that they're doing it on purpose. I don't think MaTag's smart enough to know what a fascist or an anti-fascist is. She's just a big ball of emotion that sees a thing and hates it, or sees a thing and likes it, and then that's the thing that she likes is good and constitutional, and the things that she doesn't like are bad and Antifa and anti-constitutional. It's just I don't have much respect for her brain thinky parts.
fine. I don't respect a lot of politicians' brain thinky parts. So
I know.